At my 72nd birthday party, in front of 300 guests and live cameras, my son slapped me, shoved my face into my own birthday cake and yelled, "Sign the papers, old man. You're done. This company doesn't belong to you anymore." I quietly wiped the frosting off my face, looked him in the eyes and said, "Enjoy tonight." At 7:12 the next morning, my phone finally rang, and for the first time in years, he was begging me to answer. "I'm so grateful you chose to spend this time with me. While you're here, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, your city, your country?" I read every single one. This story contains fictional elements added for narrative and educational purposes. Names and settings are coincidental. The lesson, however, is worth keeping. There are moments a man spends his whole life preparing for without ever knowing it. Mine arrived on a Saturday evening in September inside a room full of crystal chandeliers and people who had driven from 3 states away to watch me turn 72 years old. The Grand Harborview Ballroom sat on the 31st floor of the most expensive hotel in Charleston, South Carolina. And tonight, every seat at every table was filled. 300 guests, shipping partners, dock foremen, city councilmen, journalists from 2 trade publications, and people who had simply known me long enough that it would have been rude not to invite them. 3 camera crews had set up positions around the room, one at the back wall, one on a raised platform to the left of the stage, one mounted on a track along the right side. Live stream. My idea. My arrangement. The team had assumed it was vanity. It was not vanity. Frank Caldwell, my attorney, and the closest thing to a best friend I have had in 30 years, was already in position when I stepped off the elevator. He sat near the southeast corner of the room, a glass of water in front of him, his worn leather briefcase on the floor beside his chair. Frank is the kind of man who can sit at a party and look like he is enjoying himself while running through contingency scenarios in his head. I have always admired that about him. He caught my eye for exactly 1 second, then looked away. That was all we needed. The room smelled like gardenias and old money, and the harbor lights outside the floor-to-ceiling windows turned the water below into something almost beautiful. I shook hands. I accepted congratulations. I smiled at people whose names I had known for decades, and felt beneath all of it the particular stillness of a man who has been waiting a very long time for a very specific thing to happen. Diana found me before the first course was served. My daughter-in-law was wearing a deep green gown that made her look like she had been assembled by committee for exactly this occasion. She was 38 years old, sharp-featured, and possessed of the particular confidence that comes not from achievement, but from proximity to it. She touched my arm the way you touch something you are planning to move. "Robert," she said. She had never once called me by my first name, easily, always with a cool formality I had never offered. "You look wonderful tonight. 72. Can you believe it?" "I can believe most things, Diana," I said. She smiled. The smile did not reach past her cheekbones. The first course arrived. Diana rose from her seat and lifted her champagne glass, and the room's noise softened the way it does when someone with enough presence decides they want to be heard. "Let's raise a glass to Robert Harmon, the man who carried this empire on his back." Her voice was warm, easy, perfectly pitched to carry across 300 people without sounding like it was trying to. But funny how it works, isn't it? The older he gets, the tighter his grip. She let the pause breathe. 72 years old, still holding on to that chair. "What's the plan, Arthur? Have them bury it with you." Light laughter. Polite applause. A few people exchanged glances. Diana lowered her glass and looked at me with an expression of pure, radiant warmth, and I raised my own glass toward her and drank because the cameras were running. And I had made a decision 9 years ago about how this evening would end, and nothing Diana Harmon said before midnight was going to change it. 20 minutes later, as the salad plates were being cleared, I watched her lean toward the couple at the adjacent table. Her voice dropped just low enough to exclude me while remaining just loud enough for me to hear every word. "Look at him go," she murmured, nodding in my direction. "Still thinks he's the center of the universe. Bless his heart, too far gone to realize he's just a ghost playing dress-up for the younger crowd." The woman across from her gave a small, uncomfortable laugh. Her husband studied his wine glass with great concentration. I reached for my water, took a slow drink, and thought 2 more hours. The main course arrived. I stood to make my way toward the podium at the front of the room, and Diana appeared at my elbow as if she had materialized from the carpet. "Robert." Her hand closed around my forearm, firm, deliberate, the grip of someone who has practiced this particular gesture. "Maybe tonight you let Nathan speak first. You've had 72 years at the podium." She tilted her head slightly, and her eyes were patient and bright. Give the room something new. Spare these people another history lesson from the Stone Age. I looked at her hand on my arm. Then I looked at her face. Then I stepped back from the podium and returned to my seat and folded my napkin across my lap, and Diana walked back to the head table with her chin lifted and her shoulders set with the particular satisfaction of a woman who believes she has just won something. She had not won anything. She had simply moved her piece. I watched her settle into her chair beside my son. Nathan Harmon, 42 years old, my only child, sat with his jaw set and his water glass wrapped in both hands. He was a handsome man, Margaret's cheekbones, my jawline, the particular way of holding himself that had once made me quietly proud. He was staring at the center of the table with an expression I recognized as the one he wore when he had already decided something and was working up the speed to do it. Diana leaned close and said something in his ear. Nathan's shoulders straightened by exactly half an inch. Frank Caldwell in the southeast corner set his water glass down without drinking from it and placed both hands flat on the table. I picked up my fork and took a bite of food I did not taste, and I thought, here we go. Everything I had spent 9 years building toward was about to arrive. Not in a courtroom, not across a conference table, but in a room full of crystal chandeliers and gardenias with 3 cameras running and 300 witnesses who had come to watch me celebrate 72 years of living. My son reached for the microphone. Nathan had always known how to fill a room. Even as a boy of 9 or 10, he would walk into spaces like he had been there before, chin up, eyes moving, scanning for the reaction he wanted. I used to watch him do it and feel a quiet, complicated pride, the kind that lives right next to worry and refuses to be separated from it. Standing at that microphone now at 42 years old in a dinner jacket that fit him the way expensive things fit people who have always expected expensive things, he looked exactly like that boy, except the room he was trying to fill was mine. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice came through the sound system clean and strong, the practiced projection of a man who had spent a decade in boardrooms. "Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate my father's birthday. 72 years. He let the number hang in the air for a beat, then smiled. "That's a long time to be in charge of anything." Polite laughter rippled through the tables. I joined it. I smiled and nodded and set my fork down on my plate with the care of a man who has absolutely nothing to worry about. Nathan's smile shifted. Just slightly. Just enough for me to see, and I had been reading my son's face for 42 years, so I saw everything. "You want to know why this company has been dead in the water for 3 years? His voice sharpened, the warmth cutting out of it like a light switched off. He pointed across the room directly at me, his arm straight and steady. "Because of that old man right there. Too selfish, too drunk on his own power to step aside, he'd rather drag this whole thing into the ground than walk through the door of a retirement home." The room temperature dropped. I felt it on my skin before I heard it in the sudden absolute absence of ambient noise, no silverware, no shifting chairs, no murmured conversation. 300 people holding very still. I did not move. Nathan stepped down from the podium and crossed the floor toward me. His jaw was tight, his chest rising and falling faster than he wanted it to. He reached my chair and grabbed the back of it with both hands and wrenched it sideways, wood scraping against marble, a sharp, ugly sound that bounced off every wall. This seat is not yours anymore." His voice cracked on the last word, and he swallowed it down and kept going louder. "Look at yourself. You're old. All you're doing is keeping the chair dirty." I sat in the chair he had just tried to empty. My hands were flat on the table. My heart was hammering in a way I chose not to show on my face. "Nathan," I said, quietly. Just his name. "Don't." He pointed at me and his hand was shaking, not with weakness, but with the particular tremor of a man who has held something in for a very long time and has just let it go all at once. He reached to the head table and snatched up the stack of documents that had been sitting beside Diana's place card all evening. Then he turned and hurled them at my chest. Papers exploded outward. Several guests flinched. A woman near the back made a small, involuntary sound. "Sign it." Nathan's voice tore loose from every rehearsed quality it had started the evening with. Raw now, jagged. "Right now, in front of everyone in this room, don't make me stand here and tell them what you really are. A power-addicted old man who loves this pile of steel more than his own blood." I looked at the papers scattered across the table and on the floor. "I did not pick them up. Your mother would have wanted you to let go." His voice dropped suddenly, which was somehow worse than the shouting. Low and deliberate, shaped with care the way you shape something designed to cut. "She's been gone all these years, and you still haven't released a single thing. Maybe she's the lucky one." He leaned forward close enough that I could see the tears building along his lower eyelids. Tears he was furious at himself, for I could tell furious and unable to stop. "If she'd lived to see this, she'd spit in your face for it." The pain that moved through me then started behind my sternum and spread outward through my arms until my fingers went briefly cold. Margaret. He had just used Margaret. The woman who had driven to the dock every Friday evening with coffee and a sandwich and never once complained about any of it. He had taken her name and sharpened it into something I could feel between my ribs. I pressed my back teeth together. I breathed through my nose. I looked at my son's wet, furious, breaking face, and I thought of a 9-year-old boy who used to fall asleep against my shoulder on long drives home from the yard. Then Nathan's hand came up. I saw it in the fraction of a second before it happened. I did not step back. I had decided a long time ago that I would not step back. The slap cracked through the ballroom like a starting pistol. My head snapped sideways. My glasses flew from my face. The momentum carried me backward, and my hip caught the corner of the table, and I went down my shoulder, hitting first, then the side of my face against the cold marble floor, and the pain arrived all at once, bright and sharp and total, spreading from my jaw to my shoulder to somewhere deep in my chest that had nothing to do with the fall. I lay on the floor of my own birthday party, 72 years old, tasting blood on my lip. Above me, Nathan stood with his hand still slightly raised chest, heaving eyes wide with the particular terror of a man who has just watched himself drive off a cliff and cannot yet believe the ground was that close. From somewhere across the room, I heard Frank Caldwell's chair push back. The birthday cake was a 3-tier construction that the hotel pastry chef had spent 2 days assembling: white buttercream frosting, dark chocolate layers, and 72 candles that the staff had not yet lit because the formal cutting was supposed to happen after dessert. I know all of this in the particular detail that a man notices when he is lying on a marble floor, staring sideways at the base of the table it is sitting on. Frank reached me before anyone else moved. He dropped to one knee beside me, his briefcase still in his left hand. He had not put it down, not even crossing a room at speed, which told me everything I needed to know about Frank Caldwell's state of mind. His right hand found my arm with a steadiness that cut straight through the noise in my head. "Robert." His voice was low and controlled, but I could hear the effort underneath it, the way you hear the effort in a bridge that is carrying more weight than it was designed for, but holding regardless. "Talk to me. Can you move everything?" "I can move everything," I said. My voice came out steadier than I had any right to expect. "Help me up." His hands took my arm, and I pressed my palm flat against the cold marble and pushed, and the pain in my shoulder spiked white-hot and brilliant, and I was halfway upright, one hand on the table edge, Frank's grip on my elbow when Nathan's hand closed around the back of my head. He shoved my face into the birthday cake. The frosting was cold and dense, and it filled my nose and pressed against my closed eyes, and I heard Nathan's voice from somewhere above me, raw and broken and furious all at once. "There you go, old man. That's your cake. Taste what 72 years of failure actually feels like." 3 seconds, maybe 4. Then his hand released. I straightened up slowly. Frosting dripped from my chin onto my jacket lapel. My lip was still bleeding from the fall. Frank's hand tightened on my elbow, and I felt him trembling not with fear, but with the kind of controlled rage that very professional people carry in their hands when they are choosing not to use it. Across the room, a longtime employee, a dock manager named Thomas Rafferty, who had worked for me for 14 years, pushed his chair back and started to his feet. Diana moved faster. She stepped sideways and placed one hand flat on Thomas's shoulder, pressing him back down, and her voice came out smooth and unhurried and utterly without mercy. "Stay where you are. Let the two of them sort out how to be human beings." Thomas looked at her hand on his shoulder. Then he sat back down, and the expression on his face was the one people wear when they have just understood something they cannot ununderstand. Nathan stepped back to the microphone. His dinner jacket had come open. His tie was crooked. His eyes were red and wet and wild, and he looked at me, frosting on my face. Blood on my lip, Frank's hand on my arm. And something moved through his expression that was not triumph. It was something uglier than triumph. Something that had already begun to curdle at the edges. "You love that line, don't you?" he said into the microphone, and his voice had dropped from shouting into something colder and more deliberate. "These hands built everything. Take a good look at those hands now, Dad. Liver spots. Shaking. Rotting." He exhaled through his nose, sharp and short. "Your time died a long time ago. Do the rest of us a favor and go with it." 300 people did not make a sound. The cameras kept running. Diana stepped forward and stood beside Nathan. For the first time all evening, she touched him in public. Her hand on his arm, deliberate and possessive, and she looked at me with a small smile that did not reach any part of her face above her mouth. "Happy birthday, Robert." Her voice was warm, the way expensive poison is warm going down. "We're going to spend every single day after this erasing your name from everything you think you built." I reached up and wiped the frosting from my face with the linen napkin I had somehow kept hold of through all of it. I did it slowly, methodically, the way my father had taught me to do things when I was angry, slowly, so that the anger had somewhere to go that was not outward. Then I straightened to my full height. I looked at my son, not at Diana, not at the room. At Nathan, at the man standing in the wreckage of everything I had given him, soaked in his own tears and his own fury, holding a microphone in a hand that had just struck his 72-year-old father in front of 300 witnesses and 3 live cameras. My chest ached with a pain that had nothing to do with the fall and everything to do with 34 years. You just destroyed the only thing that ever proved you weren't nothing, I said. The microphone on the podium was still live. Every syllable went out across that room like a stone dropped into still water, and I watched them land on my son's face, and I watched something in him go very quiet and very still in a way that the shouting and the tears had not been. I turned away from him. Frank was already moving his briefcase back in both hands, his face arranged into the professional composure of a man who has decided that this particular moment calls for forward motion rather than commentary. We walked to the main doors together. I did not hurry. I did not look back. With every step I took across that ballroom floor, I was aware of 300 people breathing again behind me, of the low, urgent tide of voices beginning to rise, of phones being lifted from tables. Good, I thought. Record every frame of it. I need them to see all of it. The doors swung open, and the corridor came up around us, cool and quiet and entirely ordinary, and Frank fell into step beside me without a word, and we walked towards the elevator at the pace of 2 men who know exactly where they are going. At the elevator, as the doors slid open, I said, without looking at him, "Call the team, Frank." "Already started," he said. The limousine pulled out of the Harborview's lower garage and turned south toward the harbor, and I pressed 2 fingers against the cut on my lip and looked out at the water and let out the first breath I had fully exhaled in 3 hours. Charleston Harbor at night is one of the few things in my life that has never changed. The cranes are taller than they were 40 years ago. The container ships wider, the lights along the waterfront multiplied into something almost beautiful. But the water itself moves the same way it always has, dark and patient and entirely indifferent to everything that human beings choose to build and destroy along its edges. I have always found that steadying. The harbor does not care about tonight. The harbor will be here long after everyone in that ballroom has forgotten what they witnessed. Frank sat across from me with his phone already in motion, his thumbs working with the focused efficiency of a man who has been waiting years to send exactly these messages. His leather briefcase, the same battered one he had carried into my kitchen 30 years ago. The first time we sat across a table and built something together was open on the seat beside him. "First confirmation in," he said, without looking up. "Barbara in HR is standing by. Midnight termination is queued." "Good," I said. He glanced up then, and I could see the question forming behind his eyes, the one he was too professional to ask out loud. I answered it before he could find the words for it. "I'm not falling apart, Frank," I said. "I need 20 minutes, that's all." He nodded once and went back to his phone, and I turned back to the water, and I let myself go all the way back to the beginning. I was 35 years old when I first leased dock space in Charleston. I had $9,000, a used crane that needed 2 men and a prayer to start every morning, and a handshake deal with a retired shipbuilder named George Whitfield, who said I reminded him of himself 30 years earlier and wanted to see what I would do with it. I worked from before sunrise until after dark 7 days a week, and I ate whatever was cheap, and I slept on a cot in the back of the dock office 3 nights out of 7 because the drive home was 40 minutes I could not afford to lose. Margaret came to the dock every Friday evening without being asked. She was 29 years old, my wife of 2 years, a 3rd-grade teacher who smelled like chalk and coffee and whatever shampoo she used that I have never been able to identify in anything I have smelled since. She would drive to the dock after her last class on Fridays, park her car in the gravel lot, and walk in carrying a thermos and a wax paper sandwich, and she would find a crate to sit on and watch me work. Sometimes she read. Sometimes she just watched the water. She never once told me it was too much or asked when it would get easier or suggested there might be a smarter way to spend our 30s. "You're going to build something real here," she told me one evening, sitting on an overturned crate with her shoes off and her feet tucked under her. "I don't know how long it takes, but you're going to." "How do you know that?" I asked. She looked at me like I had said something genuinely funny. "Because you're too stubborn not to," she said. "And because I drove 40 minutes to bring you a ham sandwich, and I am not wrong about people I drive 40 minutes for." I had laughed then, a real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere below the exhaustion. Margaret had that quality. She could reach past whatever wall I had built in a given week and find the person underneath it, and she did it without effort, without strategy, as naturally as breathing. Nathan was born in the spring of our 4th year on the dock. I held him in the delivery room, with grease still under my fingernails despite 3 rounds of scrubbing, and I remember thinking that he was the most astonishing thing I had ever been allowed to hold, and that I would do anything, absolutely anything, to make sure the world treated him with some basic measure of kindness. Margaret died 14 months later. A brain aneurysm on an ordinary Thursday morning while Nathan was eating cereal in his high chair. She was 31 years old. I drove to the hospital, and a doctor I had never met told me she was gone, and I sat in a plastic chair in a hallway that smelled of antiseptic, and I pressed my hands flat against my thighs to stop them shaking, and I thought about my son at home with the babysitter waiting for one of his parents to come back. I drove home. I lifted Nathan out of his high chair. He grabbed my collar with both fists the way he always did, and pressed his forehead against mine and said, "Dada!" in the particular tone he used when he was glad to see me, and I held him against my chest and breathed in the smell of his hair and made him a promise I never spoke out loud, but kept every day of my life since. "I will not let you fall. Whatever it costs me, I will not let you fall. Robert." Frank's voice came from across the seat. 20 minutes. I pulled my eyes away from the harbor. My lip had stopped bleeding. My shoulder ached with the deep, grinding persistence of something wrenched, but not broken. Outside the window, the lights of East Bay Street moved past in long, amber streaks. "All right," I said. I straightened up and let the memory go. "Tell me where we are." Frank set his phone face down on the seat beside him and looked at me with the expression of a man who has spent 30 years preparing for a conversation and is finally having it. "Every piece is in position," he said. "Everything we built over 9 years tonight, it all moves. My study at home is not a room that looks like the headquarters of anything significant. It holds a desk, 2 leather chairs worn soft from 30 years of use, a wall of bookshelves that Margaret filled and I have never rearranged, and a fireproof safe built into the wall behind an oak panel. She picked out the year we moved in because she said the grain matched the color of the harbor at low tide. It is not a large room. It is not an impressive room. But by the time Frank and I arrived at 11:45 that night, it had become the most consequential room in South Carolina. Frank set his briefcase on the desk and opened it, and the stack of documents inside was nearly 3 inches thick, rubber banded into sections with colored tabs that corresponded to a sequence he and I had mapped out, refined, and reviewed 4 times in the past 18 months alone. Every document was signed. Every document was dated. Every document was current. He looked at me across the desk. "Ready on, you're ready," I said. "Walk me through it." He pulled the first section free and set it between us. The Reputation Protection Agreement. Nathan signed it on his first day as Director of Operations 11 years ago. 40 minutes, 12 documents. He did not read a single page of any of them. Frank's voice was professionally flat, the way it gets when the stakes are real. Clause 7. Gross misconduct. Any act of physical violence, verbal assault, or conduct materially damaging to the reputation of Harmon Shipworks or its leadership constitutes grounds for immediate termination without notice and without severance effective the moment the act is witnessed and documented. 3 cameras, I said. 12,000 people on the live stream. Documented does not begin to cover it, Frank said. He turned to the next tab. Clause 12. The clawback provision. In the event of termination for gross misconduct, the company reserves the right to pursue full recovery of all bonuses, equity distributions, and financial benefits paid to the terminated officer within the preceding 5 years through civil litigation if necessary. My chest tightened, not with satisfaction, with the particular weight of something that has been necessary for a very long time finally becoming real. And the shadow account, I said. Frank nodded and set a separate binder on the desk, thinner but heavier in every way that mattered. 9 years of documentation. Every transfer Nathan made from the Operational Reserve Fund, every wire to Diana's Family LLC, every disbursement to accounts we traced back to the Belshaw Family Trust. He opened it to the summary page. Total $4.3 million. Every transaction time-stamped, sourced, and cross-referenced. I looked at the number on the page. $4.3 million that Nathan had moved over 9 years, believing the whole time that he was stealing from a man who did not know, believing that patience and subtlety and Diana's coaching were enough to make it invisible. He never knew the account existed, I said. He knew the Operational Reserve Fund existed, Frank said. He never knew what else it was watching for. Frank closed the binder. You let him believe he was stealing from you. I let him believe exactly that, I said, because I needed the complete picture, not a fragment of it. Not enough to terminate him for a single incident, enough to pursue full recovery under Clause 12 and present 9 years of documented pattern as the foundation of the civil suit. Frank pressed his lips together and looked at me with the expression he wears when he disagrees with something and has already decided not to say so. He picked up his pen. The civil lawsuit, he said. $4.3 million under the clawback provision plus damages. I can file the emergency motion for asset preservation simultaneously that freezes every account we can identify before he can move anything. Duty judge hears it at 8 tomorrow morning. File it, I said. Both together. He made a note. Then he set down his pen and reached into the briefcase for the final document. A single folder thinner than the rest, no colored tab. He placed it on the desk between us and looked at me. The trust amendment, he said carefully. The one that activates the primary beneficiary designation. I looked at the folder. My hand rested on the desk beside it, but did not open it yet. The name on that beneficiary line, Frank said, is not Nathan's. It has not been Nathan's for 8 years. He paused. You've never told me who it is. No, I said. I haven't. Is tonight the night you do? I looked at the harbor through my study window. The water was dark and moving and entirely itself the way it always was. Not yet, I said. But soon, Frank. Sign the amendment first. Then I'll tell you everything. Frank uncapped his pen. His hand was steady. Mine, when I reached across and took the pen from him to add my own signature to the final line, was steadier than I had any right to expect from a man who had just been put face first into his own birthday cake. While Frank worked through the documents at my desk that night, I sat in the chair by the window, and let myself go back to the Sundays. There were 43 of them. 43 Sunday evenings over the course of 3 years, Nathan arriving at 6, cooking the soup Margaret used to make, setting the table the way she had taught him before she died. A thick navy bean and ham soup that takes 4 hours if you do it right, served in the blue ceramic pot Margaret bought at a market in Savannah the year before Nathan was born. The first time Nathan set that pot on my table, my throat tightened so sharply I had to breathe through my nose to hold my expression together. I do not think he remembered where it came from. I was not certain he knew, but I smiled and said, "That smells exactly right." And he smiled back with something genuine in it, something that still looked for just a moment like the boy he used to be, and I thought maybe I am wrong about all of it. Maybe this is still salvageable. I was not wrong. It was not salvageable. But I needed those Sundays to know for certain. "You seem good, Dad," Nathan said one evening. Maybe the 15th or 16th Sunday, and ladling soup into my bowl with the easy confidence of a man who is comfortable in someone else's kitchen. "Relaxed. You're not usually this relaxed." "Best soup you've made in months," I said. "You used more ham this time." He grinned wide and opened the grin that split his face the way it had when he was 9 years old and proud of something. "Caught that, did you?" "I catch most things," I said, and took a spoonful, and across the table from me, my son laughed and refilled his own bowl, and had absolutely no idea that 11 minutes earlier I had received a notification on the secure device in my jacket pocket, telling me that $340,000 had just been wired from the Harmon Shipworks operational reserve to an LLC registered in Diana's maiden name. That was how it worked every Sunday for 3 years. He would arrive at 6, cook the soup, set the table, ask about the business in the careful, casual tone of someone who has rehearsed the question, and I would answer in the careful, forthcoming tone of someone who has rehearsed the answer. We were 2 men performing a relationship for an audience of each other, and we were both in our separate ways very good at it. The difference was that I knew we were performing. The device was a small thing, barely larger than a pager, which tells you how long Frank and I had been building this, and I kept it in the inside pocket of whatever jacket I was wearing on Sundays. Every transfer Nathan made from the shadow account sent a notification within 4 minutes. I would feel the faint vibration against my ribs, and I would reach for my water glass, and I would take a slow drink, and I would think, there it is. Another page of the document. "You ever think about stepping back a little?" Nathan asked one evening, the 28th Sunday. I think, though, they blur together in some ways. "Not retiring, just delegating more. You work harder than anyone I know." I looked at my son across that table, and my heart ached with a pain so specific and so old I had no name left for it. He was watching me with something that looked for all the world like genuine concern. And underneath the performance, underneath the transfers and the planning, and Diana's voice in his ear, I believed it was genuine concern. I believed that somewhere in there he actually worried about me working too hard. That was the thing that made the Sundays the hardest thing I have ever done. Not the betrayal, the love that was still mixed up inside it. "I delegate plenty," I said. "Eat your soup." He smiled and shook his head like I was a lost cause, and we ate together in the warm light of the kitchen, and I pressed the notification device through the fabric of my jacket with 2 fingers, and thought, "Keep going, son. I need the full picture." The 43rd Sunday was 11 days before the birthday party. Nathan arrived 20 minutes early, which he had never done before, and he was in a mood I recognized immediately: expansive, electric, barely contained. His shoulders were loose in a way they had not been in months. He talked more than usual, moved around my kitchen with the particular ease of a man who believes he is very close to getting everything he wants. He set the soup on the table and filled my bowl first, the way he always did. And then he looked up at me, and his face broke open into the widest grin I had seen from him in years. "You look good, Dad," he said. "You seem relaxed." My heart contracted so violently I had to press my back molars together to keep my face still, because he meant it. In that moment, my son genuinely believed I was happy, genuinely glad of it. And underneath everything he had spent 5 years becoming that thread of the boy who had loved me was still there, still real, still breaking my heart. "I feel good," I said. "Best soup in months, Nathan." He laughed, said he had used more ham, and sat down across from me, and we ate in the warm light of the kitchen for the 43rd and final time. And I thought, 11 more days. 11 more days, and I will never have to perform this role again. From the desk behind me, Frank's voice came quietly. "Midnight sequence complete. Phase 2 begins at 7 a.m. I set down the memory of those 43 Sundays and said nothing, because some things do not need a response. Some things simply need to be received. Frank had fallen into a rhythm at my desk. Phone calls, confirmations. The quiet, mechanical precision of a man executing a plan he had spent years memorizing. I sat in the chair by the window and watched the harbor and thought about Diana Belshaw, because you cannot understand what happened to my son without understanding her first. She walked through my front door 7 years ago on a Sunday evening in October, wearing a cream-colored dress and a smile she had clearly spent time on. Nathan had his hand on the small of her back and his chin lifted in the particular way he used to stand as a boy when he was proud of something and wanted me to notice. "Dad," he said, "this is Diana." She extended her hand and looked me directly in the eye and said, "Mr. Harmon, I have heard so many wonderful things about you." And her voice was warm and her grip was firm, and everything about her said, "Trust me." I have spent 30 years reading contracts and reading people, and I will tell you this: the ones who want your trust immediately are the ones who have already decided what to do with it. "Welcome to the house, Diana," I said, and I shook her hand, and I smiled, and I meant every word of it. Because she was Nathan's choice, and Nathan's happiness was the only thing I had ever truly built this company for. I was wrong to mean it that easily, but I did not know that yet. Her father, Gerald Belshaw, was a silver-haired man with the particular ease of someone who has never once had to earn the room he walked into. We had dinner 2 weeks later at the Harbor Club, and he shook my hand with the hearty confidence of a man performing generosity and said, "Robert Harmon, the shipbuilder. Remarkable what a man can do starting from nothing," in a tone that made starting from nothing sound faintly like a character flaw he was too polite to name directly. I smiled. I said, "It has its advantages." And I filed Gerald Belshaw away in the part of my mind where I keep things I will need later. The change in Nathan came slowly enough that I could almost tell myself it was not happening. He started arriving late to Monday morning meetings without explanation. He began ordering renovations for his office without submitting the standard approval requests. He stopped bringing contracts to me the way he once had, automatically, the way you bring something to the person whose opinion you actually respect, and when I offered my thoughts anyway, he received them with a new flatness behind his eyes that he tried to disguise as attentiveness, and did not quite manage. Then one evening, I was walking down the hall toward the kitchen when I heard Diana's voice coming through the speaker of Nathan's phone, low and unhurried, and absolutely certain of itself. "His money should already be yours, Nathan." Her voice was the voice of someone who has made a decision and is simply waiting for the other person to catch up. "Every dollar he makes you ask for is a leash. You built half of what that company is. You know that. Everyone who matters knows that." I stopped walking. My hand tightened on the doorframe until I felt the wood grain press into my palm. Nathan's voice came back lower. It's not that simple, Di. He built it from nothing. I can't just... You are not taking anything from him. Her voice sharpened by exactly 1 degree. Not angry, just harder the way a blade gets harder when you apply pressure at the right angle. You are claiming what is already yours. There is a difference, Nathan. Think about it. I stepped back from the doorway. My chest was burning with a pain that had nothing to do with my ribs and everything to do with my son's voice. The hesitation in it, the way he had started to say something true, and then stopped himself, pulled back by something stronger than his own instinct. He had not agreed with her, but he had not pushed back either. I walked to the kitchen and put the kettle on, and stood at the window watching the street outside while the water heated, and my jaw ached from how hard I was pressing my teeth together, and I thought, so this is what it looks like. This is the thing I have been watching come for 18 months, and now I have heard it out loud, and now I know exactly what I am dealing with. 3 weeks later, the first notification arrived on my secure device. $180,000 wired from the Harmon Shipworks operational reserve to an LLC I had never heard of. I stood in my study and read the notification twice. Then I picked up the phone and called Frank. It has started, I said. How much? Frank asked. His voice was immediately alert, no trace of sleep even though it was close to midnight. 180,000, I said. First transfer, a brief pause. Then Frank said in the quiet voice he uses when something is serious, Do you want me to stop it? No, I said, and my voice was steadier than my heart. I want you to record it. Every single one. Because if this is how my son wants to do this, then we are going to do it properly, Frank. All the way to the end. 8 years ago, 1 full year before Diana Belshaw walked through my front door in that cream-colored dress, I drove to Frank's office on a Tuesday morning and said 4 words that changed everything. Restructure the trust. All of it. Frank set down his coffee and looked at me across the desk with the expression he wears when he is deciding whether to ask questions or simply start working. He chose questions. Frank always chooses questions first. All of it, he repeated. You mean the operating assets, the real estate holdings, the equity, everything? I said. Harmon Shipworks, the dock properties, the investment portfolio, the Charleston warehouse holdings. All of it moves into a private, irrevocable trust. I serve as sole trustee. Nothing, not the chairmanship, not the CEO position, not a single share of equity can transfer to any individual without my written authorization, countersigned by the trust's independent administrator. Frank was quiet for a moment. Outside his office window, the morning traffic on Broad Street moved past in the ordinary way of a city that does not know it is sitting next to a decision being made. Nathan won't be able to assume control of anything without your explicit sign-off, Frank said carefully. That is the point, I said. Robert. Frank leaned forward and set his elbows on the desk. You're doing this before he's done a single thing wrong, before there is any evidence of anything. You're restructuring 40 years of accumulated assets based on, he searched for the word. A feeling. I'm restructuring 40 years of accumulated assets, I said, based on 35 years of reading people for a living. And the particular feeling I have had for the past 6 months every time I watch my son come home from a dinner with the Belshaw family. I met Frank's eyes across the desk. I hope I am wrong, Frank. I genuinely hope that. But if I am right, I need this in place before anything happens. Not after. Frank held my gaze for a long moment. Then he reached for his legal pad and uncapped his pen. "Walk me through what you want," he said. "I want to explain something to you about how a private, irrevocable trust works in plain terms, because the legal language can obscure something that is actually very simple. When I transferred Harmon Shipworks into that trust, I remained in complete control of the company as sole trustee. I ran it, made decisions, signed contracts exactly as before. But the ownership of the assets no longer sat in my personal name in a way that could be seized, inherited, or transferred through any means other than the trust's own specific terms. Nathan could become CEO tomorrow, and it would not give him $1 of ownership. He could have me declared incompetent, and it would not matter. The assets were in the trust, and the trust's terms were the only law that governed them. What Nathan believed for 8 years was that patience and subtlety and $4.3 million in quiet transfers would eventually position him to walk into a boardroom and take everything. What Nathan did not know was that there was nothing to take. The cage had no door. Now, at 2 a.m. on the night of my 72nd birthday, Frank looked up from his laptop and said, "Filed. Emergency civil lawsuit, $4.3 million under the clawback provision. Asset preservation motion filed simultaneously. Duty judge reviews it at 8 a.m. That gives Nathan approximately 6 hours before every account we can identify is legally frozen. He won't be able to move a single dollar," I said. "Not a cent," Frank said. "Not to Diana, not to the Belshaw LLC, not anywhere." He closed the laptop and rubbed his face with both hands, the first sign of tiredness I had seen from him all night. 9 years, Robert. Every Sunday dinner, every transfer, every document. Tonight it all lands exactly where you built it to land. My chest tightened with something I could not name cleanly, not satisfaction, not relief, not grief, but some complicated thing that contained all three and refused to be separated into its parts. I looked at the harbor through the window. The sky at the eastern edge was still fully dark, but there was something in the quality of it that suggested the dark was thinking about changing. "Go home, Frank," I said. "Get a few hours of sleep." He gathered his papers and stood, and at the door he paused and looked back at me with the expression of a man who has one more thing to say and is choosing his words carefully. "Robert," he said, "whatever happens tomorrow, you gave him 9 years of Sundays. You gave him every chance a man could give." I looked at the dark harbor and pressed my fingers against the edge of the desk and felt the wood grain solid and real beneath my hands, and I said, "I know I did, Frank. That is the only part of tonight that does not hurt." He closed the door behind him, and I sat alone in the room where I had built everything, and I let the silence hold me, and I waited for morning. I slept 3 hours on the couch in my study. My body has learned over 72 years to accept whatever it is given without complaint. A cot in a dock office, a car seat on a long drive, 3 hours on a couch that is slightly too short for a man my height. When I woke at 6:45, gray morning light was coming through the study window and the harbor was fully lit, and Frank was already calling. I answered before the second ring. "Talk to me," I said. My shoulder ached with a deep, grinding persistence. My lip had crusted over in the night. I sat up slowly and pressed my feet flat against the floor and waited. "Process servers arrived at the Mount Pleasant address at 7:03, Frank said. His voice carried the particular alertness of a man who has not slept but has been too focused to notice. Nathan answered the door. "Go ahead." He was still in last night's clothes. Dinner jacket, open shirt, untucked eyes so swollen they were barely open. He looked. Frank paused, choosing his word with care. He looked like a man who had been sitting in a dark room all night waiting for something bad to arrive. Nathan took the envelope. He opened it on the front doorstep in the early morning quiet of his neighborhood, and Frank's process server, a methodical man named David, who had done this work for 20 years, reported that Nathan read the first page twice, then the second, and then his hands began shaking so badly that the papers made an audible sound in the stillness. "This isn't right," Nathan said, his voice cracked and raw at the edges. "This can't be right. There has to be a mistake somewhere." "There is no mistake, Mr. Harmon," David told him. "The filing attorney's contact information is on page 4. At 7:45, Nathan drove to the Harmon Shipworks yard on East Bay Street. His key card, deactivated by Barbara in Human Resources at 11:59 the previous night, exactly as we had arranged, did not open the parking garage gate. He parked on the street and walked to the main entrance. Jimmy Carver was on the morning shift. Jimmy had worked the front security desk for 11 years, had known Nathan since Nathan used to come to the yard as a teenager to watch the ships being fitted. He stepped forward as Nathan approached the glass doors, and his face, according to the security log's visitor notation, was the face of a man doing something he found genuinely painful. "Mr. Harmon." Jimmy's voice was kind in the way that makes difficult things harder. "I'm sorry, sir. Your access has been revoked. I can't let you in." Nathan stared at him. "Jimmy." His voice broke open on the name. "Jimmy, you know me. I've worked here 10 years. You've known me since I was 18 years old." "I know, sir," Jimmy said. "I'm truly sorry. I have my instructions." Nathan stood on the sidewalk outside the building he had walked into every single morning for a decade. He stood there for 9 minutes. The security log recorded his departure at 8:54. He did not speak again. "The vehicles," Frank continued. "The company Range Rover and the Mercedes sedan assigned to his office formal asset recovery notices were transmitted electronically at 12:01 this morning. Under South Carolina law, we're required to give 48 hours written notice before physical recovery. Both vehicles will be gone by Thursday. And the Harmon Shipworks corporate account access frozen as of 8:07 this morning, when the duty judge signed the asset preservation order," Frank said. "Every account we identified, personal joint, the Belshaw LLC accounts we traced, all flagged. He cannot move a single dollar anywhere." I stood up from the couch and walked to the window. The morning light was coming in gray and flat across the rooftops, and I pressed one hand against the glass and breathed through the tightness in my chest and waited for Frank to continue. "There's one more thing," Frank said, and his voice shifted into the register he uses when he is about to tell me something he knows will cost me. "Tell me," I said. When Nathan got back in his car outside the building before he drove home, he sat there for 6 minutes. The security camera caught it. He put both hands on the steering wheel and Frank stopped, cleared his throat. He put his forehead down on his hands, Robert. Right there in the car on East Bay Street. The camera ran for 6 minutes. My throat tightened so sharply I had to press my fingers against the windowsill to ground myself. My son, 42 years old, sitting alone in a car outside the building that had been his whole professional life, face pressed into his own hands. "All right," I managed. "What happened when he got home?" Frank's pause was the longest one of the morning. "That," he said carefully, "is what I need to tell you next." Frank's voice, when he continued, carried the particular careful neutrality he uses when he is about to deliver something he knows will draw blood. Not because it is unexpected, but because pain does not need to be a surprise to be real. When Nathan walked through his front door, Frank said Diana was already in the living room, dressed, hair done, fully put together at 9 in the morning, like she had been awake for hours. Which, he added, she probably had been. Standing beside the fireplace was a man Frank identified as Jonathan Voss, a family law attorney whose firm operates out of offices on King Street in downtown Charleston. Jonathan Voss has been practicing divorce and family litigation for 18 years and is by reputation exceptionally thorough. On the coffee table in front of Diana sat a manila envelope and her phone. Nathan. Frank read from his notes, and I could hear him turning the page. Nathan came through this door, and he saw Diana, and he saw Voss and his face. Frank paused. The neighbor who reported this to my office said she could see through the front window. She said Nathan's face just collapsed, like something structural gave way all at once. Nathan crossed the room toward his wife, and his voice, according to the neighbor's account, was the voice of a man whose last remaining handhold was the person standing in front of him. Diana. Her name broke apart in his mouth. Diana, we need to talk. It's bad. It's really bad. But we can fix it. I can fix it. I just need you to listen to me, please, Nathan. Diana's voice was the voice I had heard through the speaker of his phone 7 years ago. Surface warmth, diamond underneath pressure applied with surgical precision. Stop talking. She picked up the manila envelope from the coffee table and held it out toward him. Nathan looked at it without reaching for it. What is that? Divorce papers, Diana said. They were prepared 6 weeks ago. I have been waiting for the right moment. The sound Nathan made then was not a word. It was something that lived beneath language, a sound wrenched up from somewhere involuntary. The sound a man makes when the last wall he was leaning against simply is not there anymore. His hand shot out for the wall beside the door to steady himself, and his fingers missed it, and he stumbled sideways before catching his balance on the doorframe, his knuckles white against the wood. So you knew. His voice was barely recognizable, scraped, raw, shaking at every syllable. You knew this was going to happen. You planned all of this. Diana set the envelope on the side table nearest him and straightened up and smoothed the front of her jacket with both hands, and the gesture was so composed, so utterly unhurried, that it was more devastating than anything she could have said. Jonathan will explain the terms, she said. They are straightforward. I am not asking for anything that isn't already mine. She picked up her phone from the coffee table. She walked out of the living room without looking back at her husband, and her heels were steady on the hardwood floor, and she did not pause at the doorway, and she did not turn around. Jonathan Voss cleared his throat and said in the professional tone of a man who has delivered bad news in living rooms for 18 years, Mr. Harmon, perhaps you would like to sit down. Nathan did not sit down. He walked back out the front door past Voss, past the envelope on the side table, past the room where his marriage had just ended in under 4 minutes, and he went out onto the front porch and sat down on the top step. The neighbor said he sat there for 45 minutes with his head in both hands, not moving, while the morning traffic moved past him on the quiet Mount Pleasant Street, like the world had not just ended inside that house. I listened to all of this without speaking. My hand was flat against the study windowsill, and I was pressing down on it with enough force that I could feel the grain of the wood pushing back against my palm, and I needed that pressure, that specific and solid reality, because the alternative was feeling everything Frank was describing all at once, and I was not certain I could do that and remain standing. 45 minutes, I said finally. 45 minutes. Frank confirmed. Then he got up and drove away. We don't know where he went after that. My throat ached. Not for Diana's choices, those were Diana's to own, but for my son on that porch step, 42 years old, head in his hands, finding out in the space of one morning that the company was gone, and the woman he had thrown everything away for had been measuring the exit for 6 weeks. "My Frank," I said, "there is something Nathan does not yet know. Something that will matter more than any of this. More than the company, more than Diana, more than the lawsuit." I turned away from the window and looked at the photograph on my desk, a boy of 11, in a Savannah Braves cap, grinning at the camera with a gap between his 2 front teeth. I have been carrying it for 8 years, and I think the time has almost come. Frank was quiet for a beat. Then carefully, "The beneficiary, the name on the trust amendment." "Yes," I said, "but not yet. There is one more thing I need to do first, and it begins with a drive to Savannah." Nathan lost everything in a single morning: his keycard, his office, his marriage, all of it. Gone. But there was something else. Something Nathan never knew existed. Something I had been carrying for 8 years, a secret so much larger than any company, any money, any legal document, that the moment it came to light, nothing in this story would ever look the same. If you are still here with me, drop a ship in the comments. Let me know you are standing with Robert. One note before we continue the chapters ahead: carry certain fictional elements woven in for the sake of human truth. If that is not for you, this is a good place to step away, and thank you for being here. But if you are ready for the part that changes everything, I want to tell you about the drive to Savannah, because it is the part of this story that made everything else worth doing. It begins with a woman named Patricia Hollis, a retired librarian who had volunteered at the same Savannah Elementary School, where Claire Reeves taught 2nd grade, and who attended the same Sunday church service as a woman in my accounting department named Sandra. The chain of connection was long and unlikely. Patricia had recognized Claire's last name, Reeves, as the same name attached to a forwarding address request at the school, a detail that lodged in her memory the way small things do when they carry the particular weight of something left unfinished. She mentioned it to Sandra without knowing what it meant. Sandra, who had worked in my accounts payable office for 9 years and understood without being told the shape of the things that mattered to me, Sandra came to me directly. She sat across from my desk on a Wednesday afternoon and told me in a careful and steady voice that Claire Reeves had been pregnant when Nathan left her. That Claire had not told him. That she had moved back to Savannah, delivered the baby alone, and had been raising the child by herself for the past 3 years, without asking anyone for a single thing. I sat with that information for 3 days before I did anything with it. On the 3rd morning, I got up before dawn, made a thermos of coffee, and drove to Savannah alone. I did not tell Frank. I did not tell anyone. It was a 2-hour drive, and I spent most of it thinking about what I was going to say and arriving at the same answer every time I had no idea. Claire Reeves opened her front door before I reached the porch steps. She must have heard the car. She stood in the doorway in a gray cardigan and dark jeans, her dark hair pulled back, and she looked at me with the careful, measuring steadiness of a woman who has spent 3 years learning to protect what is hers. She recognized me immediately. I could see it move across her face, and what followed, recognition, was not hostility, but a composure so deliberate it was almost physical. Her shoulders came back. Her chin came up by half an inch. "Mr. Harmon," she said, "I wasn't expecting you." "I know," I said. "I apologize for coming without notice. I'll leave immediately if you'd like me to. But I'd like to talk if you're willing." She studied me for a long moment, her dark eyes giving nothing away, and I thought that whatever else Nathan had thrown away when he left this woman, he had thrown away someone with considerably more backbone than he deserved. "You can come in," she said finally. "But I want you to understand something first. I am not interested in money, Mr. Harmon. I am not interested in arrangements or agreements that come with conditions attached. If that is why you drove 2 hours, You can turn around right now." "That is not why I came," I said. She held the door open and I stepped inside. The house was small and warm and full of the particular life of a home that is genuinely lived in finger paintings taped to the refrigerator, a pair of small sneakers by the door barely bigger than my hand. A stack of picture books on the coffee table with a stuffed elephant balanced on top. It smelled of coffee and something sweet baking in the kitchen, and standing in that hallway I felt a tightness in my throat that caught me completely off guard and would not go away. I heard him before I saw him. A small voice from the kitchen, high and clear and entirely certain of itself, asking whether the cookies were done yet. Claire called back that they needed 5 more minutes, and then a small boy appeared in the kitchen doorway. 3 years old, dark hair curling slightly at his temples, his mother's steady dark eyes and a smear of what appeared to be chocolate on his left cheek. He looked at me without any of the shyness most small children show with strangers. He simply looked with the frank and unhurried curiosity of someone who has not yet learned to pretend he is not looking. "Are you the man who builds ships?" he asked. "Mom has a picture of a ship in her room." My throat closed so completely that for 3 full seconds I could not have spoken if the house had been on fire. I crouched down to his level, and my knees ached with the effort, and I looked at my grandson for the very first time, and I felt something shift in my chest, that I did not have a name for something vast and quiet and entirely new, like a room in a house I had lived in for 72 years, that I had somehow never opened before. "I am Dean," I managed. "My name is Robert." He considered this with great seriousness, his head tilted slightly to one side. Then he nodded, apparently satisfied. "I'm Owen," he said. "Do you want to see the boat I made? I used real paint." Behind him, I heard Claire draw a slow, uneven breath. I looked up at her over Owen's head, and her eyes were bright and wet at the edges, the kind of bright that comes from holding something in for a very long time, and she pressed her lips together hard and looked away toward the kitchen window. I turned back to my grandson. "I would like that more than almost anything in the world," I told him. And I meant every word with a completeness that surprised me. Later, standing at her front door as I left, Claire looked at me and said quietly, "He would like it if you came back." "Then I will," I said. She nodded once. Owen would like that. It was the most important sentence anyone had said to me in years. Over the next 8 years, I drove to Savannah 41 times. I never announced a visit. I always came in the morning, always alone, always with nothing in my hands except my time, which I have come to believe is the only thing a person can give that cannot be faked and cannot be taken back once it is spent. The second visit, Owen was 3.5, and had recently decided that sharks were the most important animal in existence, and wanted to explain this to me at length. I sat on his bedroom floor for 45 minutes and learned more about shark biology than I had known in 70 years of living near the ocean. I drove home with a crayon drawing of a great white shark that he had pressed into my hands at the door, signed at the bottom in his mother's handwriting. Because Owen had not yet mastered letters Owen age 3, I still have it. It is in the fireproof safe behind the oak panel next to the wooden boat Nathan made at 8 years old. By the time Owen was 7, he knew my car by the sound of it turning onto Whitfield Street. He would be at the front door before I cut the engine bare feet on the porch boards, eyes bright with whatever he had been saving up to tell me since the last visit. One afternoon that year, as we sat together on the dock at Savannah River watching a cargo vessel work its way upstream, Owen looked up at me with the serious, undeflectable directness that had been his since he was 3 years old. "Mr. Robert," he said, "why do you drive so far just to see us? Mom says Charleston is 2 whole hours." My chest tightened. I looked at the river and I thought about what to say, and I settled on the thing that was most true. Not because some things are worth the drive, I said. And you are at the top of that list. Owen thought about this with the gravity he brought to most things. Then he nodded, apparently satisfied, and went back to watching the cargo ship, and I sat beside him and felt the particular ache of loving someone you cannot yet tell the full truth to. When Owen was 9, he decided he wanted to build a real boat. Not popsicle sticks, not a model kit from the hobby shop, a real wooden boat with joinery and proper marine paint and a hull that would actually float. He had drawn plans for it in his school notebook, 3 pages of sketches with measurements that were wildly optimistic, but showed a spatial reasoning that made me catch my breath. "Will you help me?" he asked, holding the notebook out to me with both hands. I looked at the drawings for a long moment. My eyes were burning in a way I was not going to acknowledge. "Yes," I said. "Absolutely, yes. But we do it right, Owen. Proper joints, proper sealing, proper paint. It takes as long as it takes." "Okay," he said immediately, and his face broke into the widest grin I had seen from him, gap-toothed and absolutely luminous. "I already have a name for it." "What's the name?" He said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world, Harmon. I had to look away at the wall for a moment. My throat had closed completely, and my eyes were stinging, and I was 70 years old and sitting in a 9-year-old's bedroom, and I was not going to cry, but it was the nearest I had come since Margaret's funeral. "Now, I want to tell you about the other thing I did, the thing I did in place of walking up to Claire Reeves and saying, 'I am sorry my son did this to you,' because those words, however true, were not mine to offer and would not have changed anything that mattered. The Harmon Maritime Education Fund was established as a nonprofit foundation 8 years ago, the same week I first drove to Savannah. It awarded academic scholarships to students in the Savannah and Charleston coastal communities, pursuing degrees in engineering, marine science, and education, Claire's field. Priority was given to single-parent households. Claire received the first award letter the following spring. She called the foundation's administrative office a legitimate nonprofit office staffed by 2 people who knew only that their funding came from a private donor and asked who was behind it. The administrator told her, "An anonymous donor who believes in coastal education, Ms. Reeves. That's all I'm authorized to share." Claire said, "Please thank them for me." "I will," the administrator said. "I read that exchange in my quarterly report and sat with it for a long time. Owen's school fees, his health insurance through a maritime workers nonprofit I had quietly funded for years. His college preparation, tutoring, all of it moved through structures that were entirely legitimate and entirely invisible. Claire was a proud woman and a capable one. She would have refused direct money. She never refused the foundation's awards because she had no reason to connect them to me and because she had worked hard enough to deserve every dollar of them on her own merits. It was the most honest dishonesty I have ever practiced. 4 days after the birthday party, I was sitting at my desk, looking at the most recent photograph of Owen, 11 years old, standing next to the completed Harmon in Claire's backyard, grinning that gap-toothed grin with both hands on the hull when Frank called. "The district attorney's office contacted me this morning," he said. "They've reviewed all 3 camera feeds from the gala. They are moving forward." I set the photograph down carefully face up and looked at it while Frank talked. "Moving forward with what charges?" I asked. "Criminal assault," Frank said. "And given your age, potentially elder abuse under South Carolina Code Section 16-3-600. The DA's office said the footage is, and I am quoting, unambiguous." I looked at Owen's grin in the photograph, at his hands on the hull of the boat that carried our name. "All right," I said. "There is something else I need you to arrange, Frank. Something that has nothing to do with charges or courts. I need you to find me a very specific kind of lawyer. I want to be honest with you about something. In the days after the birthday party, while the legal machinery ran exactly as I had designed it to run, I kept returning to a question I had no clean answer for. I could tell you it came to me at 3 in the morning, or in the shower, or during one of the long drives I took along the harbor road when I needed to think. The truth is, it came to me everywhere at all hours, with the particular persistence of questions that do not intend to be avoided. How much of what Nathan became was Diana's doing, and how much of it was mine? 1 week after the birthday party, late on a Tuesday evening, I went to the fireproof safe behind the oak panel in my study, and I opened it. The wooden boat was on the left side, exactly where I had placed it 34 years ago. Dark blue paint slightly chipped at the bow, the name Harmon still legible along the hull in the careful block letters of an 8-year-old who had taken his time with every stroke. Beside it, a stack of birthday photographs held together with a rubber band that had gone brittle with age, and 3 envelopes, Nathan's letters, written at 8, at 11, and at 14, in the progressively changing handwriting of a boy becoming someone. I lifted the boat out first, held it in both hands the way I had held it 34 years ago, at my dock office desk, the morning it appeared on my blotter with a note tucked underneath. I found the note in the second envelope. I had read it so many times over the decades that the paper had gone soft at the folds. When I grow up, I'll build real ships so you don't have to work this hard anymore. Nathan. My chest tightened until I had to breathe through my mouth to keep it from becoming something else entirely. I set the note down on the desk and pressed my fingers flat against the surface and looked at what my son had made when he was 8 years old and thought his father hung the moon. Here is the honest accounting, the one I owe you and owe myself. I was a good provider. I was present at dinners, at Little League games, where Nathan played third base and dove for grounders, with a fearlessness that made me proud, in the quiet way fathers are proud of things they cannot articulate. I drove him to school, helped with homework, sat through every school play and graduation, and every milestone that fathers are supposed to attend. But after Margaret died, I buried myself in work the way a man buries himself in anything that does not require him to feel what he is not ready to feel. The dock became the place where grief could not follow me past the front gate. I was excellent at building Harmon Shipworks. I was considerably less practiced at sitting still with my son on an ordinary Tuesday evening and simply being present without an agenda. Nathan grew up beside a father who was very good at providing and not always good at staying. And I do not say this to excuse what he did. Nothing excuses what he did. I say it because a man who refuses to see his own part in a story is not someone I want to be. I set the wooden boat back in the safe and reached for my phone, and it rang before I could pick it up. Frank. He saw the name, Frank said without preamble. On the civil suit documents, his attorney says he stopped reading when he got to it and asked her to repeat it out loud. Which name? I asked, though I already knew. The Nathan Harmon Opportunity Fund, Frank said. He asked his attorney what it was. She told him it was a scholarship foundation you established. He asked when. She told him 9 years ago. A pause. He asked her to confirm the date twice, Robert. Twice. I closed my eyes and pressed my free hand against the edge of my desk. What did he say after that? I asked. He said, Frank's voice shifted into the register he uses when he is reading from notes and wants to be precise. He was building a scholarship fund with my name while I was robbing him blind. What kind of man does that? The words landed somewhere behind my sternum and stayed there heavy and specific and impossible to set aside. He asked his attorney one more thing. Frank continued carefully. He asked whether you had ever met the students who received the scholarships. She told him you attended every annual ceremony personally. He did not respond to that verbally. She said he put his face in his hands and his shoulders shook. My throat ached so badly I had to swallow twice before I could speak. "Blank," I said, and my voice came out rougher than I intended. "Tell his attorney I want Nathan to have the original founding charter, the document with the date on it. I want him to see exactly when I signed it." "The same night you first called me about the reputation protection agreement," Frank said quietly. "Yes," I said. "Exactly that night. I established the Nathan Harmon Opportunity Fund. On a Tuesday evening in October 9 years ago, in the same hour, I ended my first phone call with Frank about the reputation protection agreement. I want you to understand the sequence of that evening, because the sequence is the whole point. I had just gotten off the phone. I had just confirmed for the first time that my son was systematically moving money out of the company he believed would one day be his with the patience of someone who thought he would never be caught. I had just made the decision to document rather than confront, to let him continue to build the case rather than have the conversation I already knew in the part of me that reads people for a living would change nothing. And then I sat at my desk in the silence after that call, and I thought about what it meant to have a son. Not what it meant legally or financially, what it meant in the simplest, most irreducible sense that there was a person alive in the world who carried my name and would carry it after I was gone, and that whatever he was becoming, the name itself was still worth something. It was still worth protecting. I could not save Nathan from the road he was choosing. I understood that with the cold, clean clarity that comes after a long fever breaks. But I could take the name Harmon and build something worthy with it. Something that would outlast both of us and mean what I had always intended it to mean. The fund was simple in design. 8 scholarships awarded annually to students from the Charleston and Savannah coastal communities, children of dock workers, welders, marine engineers, the trades that had built this industry from the waterline up. Priority given to students who had lost a parent, because I understood in the specific way that people understand things they have lived through, what it costs a child to grow up with that particular absence in the architecture of their life. I named it after my son, not to punish him, not to create a monument to his future failure. I named it after Nathan because I wanted the name to be attached somewhere in the world, to the opening of doors rather than the closing of them. I wanted there to be people walking through their lives, becoming engineers, becoming teachers, becoming people of substance and usefulness, who had gotten there partly because of a name that its owner was, at that very moment, in the process of disgracing. I attended every annual awards ceremony in October, without exception, for 9 years. I did not announce my attendance. I arrived quietly, sat in the back row, and watched the recipients receive their awards. Afterward, I spent time with each of them individually, asking about their studies, their families, their plans. I brought nothing except my attention, which is the thing I had given Nathan least of, and the thing these young people needed most. 8 years ago, a young man named Marcus Webb received the first scholarship I personally handed over. He was the son of a welder from the North Charleston shipyards, a man named Roy Webb, who had died of a heart attack when Marcus was 14, leaving behind a wife, 3 children, and a mortgage on a small house in Dorchester County. Marcus came to the ceremony in a dark suit that was slightly too large across the shoulders, the kind of suit that a family pools together to buy for an occasion that matters. He shook my hand with both of his, looked me directly in the eye, and said with a directness that reminded me painfully of the son I was in the process of losing, "Mr. Harmon, I am going to make sure this means something. I want you to know that." I believed him on the spot. I have learned in 72 years to recognize the particular quality of a promise made by someone who intends to keep it. I was right to believe him. Marcus Webb was now a licensed marine engineer at a firm in Annapolis, Maryland, the first person in 3 generations of his family to hold a professional degree. He had a daughter 4 years old named Margaret. When Frank told me that detail a year ago, my throat closed so sharply I had to set the phone down for a moment. Marcus had sent me a handwritten letter the previous Christmas. 3 pages on plain white paper, careful and honest, describing what the scholarship had meant to his life and his daughter's life and the life he was building. He signed it with gratitude from a boy who had nothing but was given a name worth living up to. I had read that letter 4 times. It lived in the top drawer of my desk. Now 10 days after the birthday party, Frank called with Nathan's response to the founding charter. His attorney says he read it 3 times, Frank said. He kept looking at the date. She said he asked her twice to confirm it was correct, that you really signed this the same night you started building the case against him. What did he say? I asked, and my hand tightened around the phone. He said, Frank paused, and I could hear him reading carefully. He was building something good with my name while I was destroying everything else. How does a person live with that? The words hit me somewhere deep in the chest, in the place where the grief of the past 10 days had been collecting like water behind a dam, and my eyes burned suddenly and sharply, and I pressed 2 fingers hard against the bridge of my nose and breathed. Stayamdi. There's one more thing, Frank said. After he said that, he sat for several minutes. Then he asked his attorney one question. A beat. He asked whether the boy in the trust amendment, the primary beneficiary, knew anything about him. My hand dropped from my face. What did she tell him? I asked. The truth, Frank said. That to her knowledge, the boy did not yet know who his father was. I stood up from my desk and walked to the window, and Charleston Harbor was bright and moving below me, and I thought about my son sitting in a rented room with a question he had just asked for the first time. Does he know anything about me? And I felt something shift inside my chest. Something small and fragile and entirely new. Frank, I said. It's time. Prepare the envelope. There is a difference between justice and cruelty, and I have spent 9 years being very careful about which side of that line I was standing on. The envelope had been sitting in the top drawer of my desk for 3 years. I had assembled it gradually over time, the way you assemble something you hope you will never need to use. A certified copy of Owen's birth certificate obtained through the Chatham County Vital Records Office in Savannah, where Claire had registered his birth. 8 years of photographs, one from each year of Owen's life, printed on plain photo paper, and ordered by date, age 3, age 4, all the way through the most recent one taken 6 weeks ago. Owen at 11, standing next to the completed Harmon in Claire's backyard, grinning with that gap between his front teeth and both hands flat on the hull like he was already claiming it. And the letter. 3 pages in Claire's handwriting, dated the spring Nathan left her, the spring she discovered she was pregnant, and did not tell him. She had written it the week after he stopped returning her calls. She had addressed it to Nathan. She had sealed it, kept it, and given it to me 2 years ago, when I finally told her the full truth about who I was and why I had been coming to Savannah. I wrote it because I needed to say it somewhere, she told me, pressing the envelope into my hands. I never intended to send it. But maybe someday he should read it. That's your call, not mine. I had kept it in my desk for 2 years, waiting for the moment when it would do something other than wound. 12 days after the birthday party, I told Frank it was time. He arranged delivery through Nathan's attorney, a straightforward transfer of personal documents, nothing legally complex, accompanied by a single handwritten note from me that said only, "This is what you walked away from." R.H. Nathan's attorney reported back to Frank that evening. Nathan had been sitting at the kitchen table of the apartment he was renting on the east side of Charleston. a furnished place temporary. The kind of apartment that tells you everything about a man's current circumstances by the absence of anything personal in it. He was drinking coffee when she arrived. He set the mug down when she handed him the envelope and looked at it for a long moment without touching it, the way you look at something you are not certain you want to know. Then he picked it up and opened it. He looked at the birth certificate first. His attorney watched his eyes move across the page name of child Owen James Reeves. Date of birth: Mother Claire Ann Reeves. Father left blank. Nathan's jaw tightened so visibly that his attorney could see the muscle working beneath his cheek. He set the birth certificate down with the exaggerated care of a man whose hands are not fully under his control. Then he went through the photographs. He turned them slowly, one by one, starting with Owen at 3. The chocolate-smeared cheek, the dark, curling hair, the frank, unhurried gaze. His attorney said his breathing changed on the 3rd photograph. By the 6th, Owen holding up a model ship he had built from a kit face, split into that enormous gap-toothed grin. Nathan's hands were shaking badly enough that the photos trembled against the table when he set them down. He picked them back up. He kept going. When he reached the last photograph, Owen at 11 hands on the hull of the Harmon Sunlight, catching the dark blue paint, he stopped. His attorney counted to 4 minutes. 4 full minutes where Nathan sat with that photograph in his trembling hands and did not move and did not speak, and his eyes filled and the tears ran freely down his face, and he did not try to stop them or wipe them away, just let them fall onto the table while he looked at his son for the first time. Then he set the photograph down and picked up Claire's letter. He read all 3 pages. His attorney said he read them slowly, the way you read something when every sentence is landing somewhere specific and painful and real. When he finished, he folded the letter back along its original creases with hands that were still shaking, and he placed it on top of the photographs, and he slid off his chair and sat down on the kitchen floor with his back against the refrigerator and his knees pulled up to his chest like a man trying to make himself smaller than the thing he was feeling. His attorney gave him time. She sat at the kitchen table above him and waited because she was a person of considerable professional wisdom, and she understood that some moments do not need management. After a while, Nathan looked up at her from the floor, and his voice when he spoke was wrecked, scraped hollow, and raw, barely recognizable as the voice of the man who had stood at a microphone 12 days ago and called his father a rotting old man in front of 300 people. "Does he know anything about me?" he asked. "Anything at all?" His attorney looked at him carefully. "To my knowledge," she said, "he knows a man named Mr. Robert who likes ships." Nathan closed his eyes. His chin dropped to his chest. His whole body shuddered once, a single, deep, involuntary tremor that moved through him from his shoulders to his hands, and then he pressed the back of his wrist hard against his mouth and held it there while his shoulders shook and shook and shook. I listened to all of this on the phone with Frank that night, standing at my study window with the harbor spread out below me. When Frank finished, I did not speak for a long time. I stood there, and I let every word of it move through me, the birth certificate with the blank line where a father's name should have been, the photographs Nathan had trembled through one by one, the image of my 42-year-old son sitting on a kitchen floor with his back against a refrigerator in an apartment that contained nothing of his life. My eyes were burning. My throat ached all the way down into my chest. "Robert," Frank said, and his voice was very quiet. "What do you want to do next?" I looked at the harbor. I thought about a boy in Savannah who named his boat after our family without being asked. "What comes next," I said slowly, "is not mine to arrange. It's his to earn. But there is one more thing I need to do first. Frank, one thing that has nothing to do with Owen or the trust or any of it. It's about Nathan. And it's the thing I am most afraid you're going to argue with me about. 14 days after the birthday party, Nathan's preliminary hearing was scheduled for 9 in the morning at the Charleston County Courthouse on Broad Street. I was not there. I was sitting at my kitchen table with coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, and I was thinking about a phone call I had made 8 days earlier that I have not yet told you about. 6 days after the birthday party, I called Patricia Drummond. Patricia Drummond had been practicing criminal defense law in Charleston for 25 years. She was widely considered the best in the city at what she did not, because she was aggressive or theatrical, but because she was meticulous, thorough, and possessed of the particular quality that separates exceptional attorneys from merely good ones. She understood that the law is not a weapon, but a structure, and she knew how to build inside it. I had watched her work twice from the opposing side of civil matters, and had come away both times with a respect I had not gone in expecting to feel. I called her on a Thursday morning and asked if she had availability for a new client. "Potentially," she said. Her voice was crisp, professional. "Who is the client?" "My son," I said. "Nathan Harmon." A beat of quiet. Then, "The man from the birthday party video." "Yes." Another pause. This one more deliberate. "Mr. Harmon," she said carefully. "You understand that if I represent your son, my obligation runs entirely to him, not to you. I will argue against the charges aggressively, which means arguing against evidence your own case depends on." "I know," I said. "That is exactly what I want. You want me to defend the man who assaulted you. I want my son to have competent representation," I said. "The charges stand. The civil suit proceeds. I am not asking you to make those things go away. I am asking you to make sure that whatever consequences Nathan faces, he faces them with someone who knows what they are doing standing beside him." Drummond was quiet for a moment that felt considerably longer than it was. "The fee arrangement," she said finally. "Anonymous, I assume?" "Completely," I said. "Nathan cannot know where the funding comes from." "That can be structured," she said. "Attorney-client privilege protects his interests regardless of who pays the retainer, as long as there is no conflict of interest. And since you are not the opposing party in the criminal matter, there is none. The district attorney's office is the opposing party. You are simply—" She paused, choosing her word. "A concerned party funding competent counsel." "Yes," I said. "That is exactly what I am." Now, 14 days after the birthday party, Frank called from outside the courthouse at 9:47 in the morning. "Drummond walked in at 9:02, he said. "The DA's assistant recognized her immediately." I watched them exchange a look across the room that said everything about how the next several months are going to go. "How did Nathan react?" I asked. "He didn't know what was happening at first," Frank said. "He thought she was there for someone else. When she introduced herself as his attorney, he said, and I'm quoting the bailiff who was standing nearby, 'I can't afford you.' She told him the retainer had been arranged and that he didn't need to worry about the fee. He asked who arranged it." Frank paused. "She told him she wasn't authorized to say." My chest tightened. I wrapped both hands around my cold coffee cup. "He asked 3 times, Frank continued. Each time she gave him the same answer. On the 3rd time, he stopped asking. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, and then he said very quietly, 'It was him, wasn't it?' She did not confirm or deny it. Nathan said, 'You don't have to confirm it. I know.' My throat tightened painfully. I set the coffee cup down before I cracked it. "Frank," I said, The charges stand. The charges stand, Frank confirmed. Drummond knows that going in. She'll push for the lightest possible sentencing outcome, argue mitigating factors, but the video evidence is what it is. She can work with the circumstances, not against the facts. Good, I said. That is all I was asking for, a beat of quiet on the line. Then Frank said, with the careful precision of a man delivering something he has been holding on to. Robert, I've been your attorney for 30 years. I've watched you negotiate contracts, restructure assets, plan 9 years of the most methodical legal preparation I have ever seen in my professional life. He paused. I have never once in 30 years seen you do something I could not explain the strategic logic of. Until now. There is no strategic logic, I said. He is my son, Frank. Whatever he did, whatever he is going to face for it, he is my son. And a man who refuses to provide for his own child's basic dignity does not get to call himself a father, regardless of what that child has done. I looked out the kitchen window at the oak tree in the yard, bare now in the October morning, and thought about what it meant for a man to start over from nothing at 42 years old. I am not forgiving him. I am not excusing him. I am simply refusing to be the reason he faces this alone. Frank was quiet for so long that I thought the connection had dropped. Then he said roughly, 30 years, Robert, and you still managed to surprise me. Go home, Frank, I said, and something in my chest eased very slightly for the first time in 2 weeks. Get some rest. We have done everything we can do from here. The next move, if there is a next move, belongs entirely to my son. I ended the call and sat in my kitchen with my cold coffee and the October light coming through the window. And I thought about Nathan in that courthouse and Patricia Drummond standing beside him, and I thought I have given him every chance a man can give. The rest is his. Some things cannot be finished by a father. Some things can only be started by a son. The letter arrived on a Wednesday evening. A young paralegal named James Whitfield delivered it by hand at 7:19. Holding the envelope with both hands, the way you carry something when you understand, without being told, that what you are holding matters. He was maybe 25 years old, serious-faced, and when I opened the front door, he simply said, "Mr. Harmon," and held it out. I closed the door and stood in the hallway for a long time. Nathan's handwriting was on the front, my name, my address, in the deliberate cursive he had developed in 4th grade and never fully left behind. I had signed thousands of documents in my life, read thousands more. I had never once needed to press my hand flat against a wall before opening one. I carried it to my study and placed it on the desk, between the 2 boats. The dark blue wooden one Nathan had made at 8 years old, and the popsicle stick Harmon that Owen had pressed into my hands on my last visit to Savannah, painted navy blue with a white stripe that wandered slightly at the bow before I broke the seal. 3 pages, yellow legal pad, blue ink, handwriting that started careful and grew less so as the pages went on, the way handwriting does when the writer stops thinking about the letters and starts thinking only about what they need to say. Dad, I have started this letter 11 times. I am not going to ask you to drop anything. I am not going to ask you for a single thing because I have spent 3 weeks reading the charter of a scholarship fund that carries my name, and I think I finally understand what it looks like to ask for nothing in return. My throat tightened so sharply I had to set the page down and press my knuckles hard against my mouth until the feeling passed. I picked it back up. The honest answer is that I knew Claire was pregnant. Diana told me the child wasn't mine. I believed her because I wanted to, because it was easier than the alternative, and because I was a coward in the specific way that men are cowards when the truth costs them something they are not ready to pay. I told myself it was a clean break. I drove away and did not look back. I want you to know that I know exactly what that makes me. I had to stop again. My eyes were burning, not the gentle sting of mild emotion, but the full, unmanageable burn of something that had been held back for too long, breaking through all at once. I breathed through my nose and stared at the ceiling, and waited for it to subside enough that I could see the page. Page 2 was harder. I don't know when I stopped wanting to stand beside you and started wanting to replace you instead. I know now that they were not the same thing. Not even close. The happiest mornings of my childhood were not birthdays or Christmas. They were the cold mornings at the yard when you let me walk the dock beside you while you talked to the engineers. I was 8 years old, and I thought that was what the whole world was supposed to feel like, standing next to someone doing something that mattered and being allowed to be there. My hand was shaking. I realized it distantly, the way you notice something happening to your body from a small distance. I set the page flat on the desk and pressed my palm down on it and breathed and did not cry, because I had not cried since Margaret's funeral 34 years ago. But it was the nearest I had come since, and I am not ashamed to tell you that. Page 3 had one short paragraph, and then below it, centered on an otherwise blank page, 3 words standing alone. I am not asking for forgiveness. I haven't earned that, and I know it. But I would like to find out if the person I used to be is still somewhere recoverable. Whatever you decide, I understand. I will understand completely. Nathan. And below that, alone in the center of the white page, in handwriting that was very careful and very small, I am sorry. I sat with those 3 words for a long time. Then I reached for my phone and called Claire. She answered on the second ring, her voice quiet. It was late and Owen was asleep down the hall. He knows everything now, I said. All of it. A breath on her end. Then I know Robert. Her voice was soft and steady and carried something in it I had not heard before. Not quite relief, not quite grief, but something that lived carefully between the two. He called me this afternoon, on his own. I didn't know he was going to. I sat very still with the phone against my ear and the 2 boats on the desk in front of me and the letter open between them, and I felt something shift inside my chest, something small and fragile and entirely real in the place where grief had been sitting for 9 years. How did he sound? I asked. Like a man who just figured out the size of what he lost, Claire said quietly. But also, she paused, choosing her words with care. Also like someone who might be ready to start figuring out what to do about it. I looked at the 3 words at the bottom of the last page. That's enough, I said. For now, that is exactly enough. 11 months later, on a Tuesday morning in August, I drove to the Harmon Shipworks yard on East Bay Street for the first time since the birthday party. I parked in my old spot by the east gate, the one with the crooked yellow line that the facilities team has been meaning to repaint for 6 years. I did not go inside. I stood by the gate with my coffee going cold in my hand, and I watched. Harmon Shipworks runs a summer youth apprenticeship program, a partnership with 3 Charleston high schools that I had established 15 years ago. For exactly the reason you might expect, I wanted young people who grew up near the water to have a reason to stay near it. Owen had applied through his school in Savannah the previous spring, using his own name without telling me he was doing it. His supervisor called me only after he had already been accepted. I had laughed out loud when Frank told me. It was the first time I had laughed in 11 months. Owen appeared at 7:40, with his supervisor, a veteran shipwright named Dale Briggs, who had worked at the yard for 22 years. Owen was wearing a hard hat that sat slightly too large on his head, a yellow safety vest over a gray t-shirt, and he had a notebook tucked under his arm and a pencil behind his ear and he was already talking, asking Dale something I could not hear from the gate, gesturing toward the hull of the vessel currently in dry dock, and Dale was nodding and answering, and Owen was writing it down before Dale had finished speaking. Frank called at 7:52. "Owen's first week report came in from Dale this morning," he said. I quote, "asks better questions than most of my second-year interns. Doesn't wait to be told what to look at. Already knows the difference between what something looks like and what it actually does." "Good," I said. "There's one more thing," Frank said. "Nathan's sentencing hearing is set for October. Patricia Drummond says the mitigating factors are strong. Community service counseling, no prior record. She expects probation and restitution rather than incarceration." "All right," I said. "He's been calling Claire," Frank added quietly. "Regularly. Owen knows there's a man named Nathan who wants to meet him someday." Claire said Owen's response was. Frank paused, and I could hear the smile in his voice. He said, "Does he know anything about ships?" My chest cracked open with something that was not grief and not pain, but something enormous and warm that I did not have a precise word for, and I pressed my free hand flat against the gate and held on. Down in the yard, Owen crouched beside the hull and placed his palm flat against the steel, feeling the surface, the temperature, the texture of the thing. It was the same gesture I had made at 35 years old on my first day on this dock. It was the same gesture Nathan had made at 8 years old the first time I brought him here on a Saturday morning. 3 generations. One gesture, one dock. I stood at that gate for another 10 minutes, watching my grandson ask questions and write down answers and look at everything like it was the most interesting thing he had ever seen. Then I finished my cold coffee, got back in my car, and drove home. On the drive back, I thought about what I had spent 40 years believing the point of all of it was. The company, the ships, the name on the building. I had been wrong about that. I understood it completely now. I did not need to leave behind a great company. I only needed to leave behind someone decent enough to build one. I have told you this story not because I am proud of every chapter in it, but because the chapters we are most ashamed of are often the ones most worth telling. I am 72 years old. I built a company with my hands and nearly lost my son with the same ones. These grandpastries are never just about the victories. They are about the long, quiet failures that happen inside a home when a father chooses the dock over the dinner table one too many times. Do not be like me. Do not mistake providing for presents. Do not wait until the damage is done to put down the work, and simply sit with your child, not to teach, not to plan, not to build anything at all. Just to be there. The ships will always need building. Your children will not always be 8 years old with sawdust on their shoes and a wooden boat in their hands and a note that says they will carry your burdens someday. I am not a perfect man. I have made choices I cannot undo and carried grief I did not always carry well. But I have learned that God does not promise us easy families. He promises us the strength to keep showing up for them even when showing up costs everything we have. If these grandpastries moved something in you, if somewhere in this revenge story you recognized a father, a son, or a version of yourself still worth recovering, then this story did exactly what it was meant to do. Leave a comment and tell me what stayed with you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you believe that love is always worth the long, hard work of rebuilding, subscribe so we never lose each other. These grandpastries exist because of you. This revenge story ends here, but the next one is already waiting. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. A gentle note: the stories ahead contain fictional elements built for reflection and human understanding. If that is not what you are looking for, We understand completely, and we are grateful for every moment you chose to spend here. Take care of yourselves, and we will see you in the next one.